The Pickelhaube, sometimes referred to as the Pickelhelm. It has been manufactured in the millions worldwide for well over 100 years and is one of the most iconic helmets ever designed. The Pickelhaube's design was finalized by King Frederick Wilhelm IV of Prussia in 1842 and was worn by Prussian and German troops all the way up to the middle of World War I before being discontinued in 1916 for the more protective Stahlhelm design. The Pickelhaube design was inspired by helmets worn during the Napoleonic era that had high metal crests designed to deflect blows from edged weapons. The first Pickelhaube was tall and made mostly of leather. The metal spike was both ornamental and could also aid in deflecting downward blows. The hat's height was reduced in 1857 when Frederick Wilhelm IV relinquished his authority due to his health, and his brother Wilhelm took over as Prince Regent. Wilhelm IV was passionate about the design and would not allow practical changes to it while in power. But the helmet went through many design changes over its lifetime, from the tall original design to the short Prussian police version. In Germany, the helmet remained ceremonially worn right up until the end of World War I. Kaiser Wilhelm II was known to wear highly decorative Pickelhaube, often wearing the imperial eagle in place of the spike. Notably, the lifeguards or bodyguards for the Kaiser also wore such helmets. The imperial eagle is a symbol dating back to the Holy Roman Empire. These eagles could be screwed on in place of the spike. Though most Pickelhaube were primarily leather and brass, several all-metal versions existed worn by high-ranking military and political figures. Shown here is Otto von Bismarck. These helmets were sometimes called lobster tail helmets due to their articulated neck guard. A similar Pickelhaube is worn by the Swedish Royal Guards even today. The helmet was also worn in full dress with plumes of different regimental colors. These were worn by German generals, staff officers, dragoon regiments, and other regiments as a special distinction. This tradition is still carried on in Chile. The tall metal spikes are able to be unscrewed and replaced with plume holders, known as Trichte. Aside from the spike, the most distinguishing feature of any Pickelhaube is the ornamental front plate. This denotes a regiment's province or state of origin. The most common emblem used was the large spread-winged eagle, the emblem of Prussia, but many different plate designs existed for other nations and other German states. The Pickelhaube was first used by Prussian infantry in 1842, and it caught on throughout other German principalities. Other European armies would adopt the helmet as well, including the Russian army in 1844 and the Swedish army in 1845. Pickelhaube throughout the 19th century were even shipped to South America, where many Prussian advisors were helping to modernize armies in the region. In 1870, Peru adopted the helmet, and some would later be seized by the Chilean military, who subsequently adopted them shortly thereafter. The Russians wore their own Pickelhaube in several different ways. Early versions were typically worn with horsehair. The horsehair would be replaced with a representation of a lit grenade, as the helmets were common amongst infantry and grenadiers. Most Russian regiments stopped wearing such helmets after 1862, but pointiness would live on in Russia when the Red Army adopted the famous woolen Budanovka hat in 1919. There were British designs also inspired by the Pickelhaube. The household cavalry and dragoon guards, for example, wear the Elbert helmet, a hybrid between the Pickelhaube and traditional dragoon helmet. In North America, the United States Army and Marine Corps briefly used a similar British-German-inspired design. Shown here is a Marine Corps dress helmet from 1892. They were used in service up until 1904. This design is also very similar to the famous British Bobby helmets. The helmets are of course most famously associated with World War I, particularly due to their regular feature in World War I propaganda. All Pickelhaube produced for the infantry before and during 1914 were made of leather, but as leather supplies dwindled in Germany due to embargoes, substitutes were tried out. This included thin sheet metal, some were made of pressurized felt, and even cardboard. All helmets worn on the front lines were cloth wrapped. This wrap was called Überzug. This made sure they wouldn't shine and make a man an easy target. This practice started in 1892. These covers were also marked with regimental numbers. Leather and sheet metal helmets offered some protection for troops should they say fall or hit their heads, but they did not greatly protect against shell fragments and shrapnel. The spike on the helmet was also a conspicuous target. In 1915, most infantry wearing Pickelhaube on the front lines would remove these spikes. They were more trouble than they were worth. Ow! Despite the Pickelhaube's poor performance as a helmet, it was actually one of the better head protectors at the start of World War I, as the majority of all infantry simply wore hats. The French were the first to standardize a steel helmet for their infantry, with initial designs released in December of 1914. Followed by the famous Adrian helmet in the spring of 1915. 20 million Adrian helmets were produced by the end of the war, and they were adopted by many other nations, including Italy. The British developed the Brodie helmet in September of 1915, resembling the medieval infantry kettle hat. These were easily stamped from a single piece of metal. They were also very effective in that they had one of the best helmet liners, which maintained a gap between the helmet and the wearer's head, so impacts from shell fragments were not transmitted directly to the skull. The Germans who started the war at the Pickelhaube, the closest thing to a real helmet, were one of the last armies to adopt a standardized modern steel helmet. In 1916, the Stahlhelm replaced the Pickelhaube, and the Pickelhaube was reduced to being worn for ceremony only. The Stahlhelm, resembling the medieval sallet, would be one of the best helmet designs of the 20th century, offering good protection to the ears and the back of the head. It's estimated 60% of the near 10 million fatalities of World War I were a result of shrapnel wounds. Fatalities would have been much greater if it wasn't for the standardization of steel helmets. When helmets were first introduced, head wounds statistically soared. It caused a scandal, and there was an outcry to ban helmets as a result. Luckily, logic prevailed, and it was discovered so many head wounds were being reported because men were living to report them, thanks to their helmets. With the collapse of the German Empire in 1918, the Pickelhaube ceased to be part of military uniform in Germany. The Stahlhelm completely took over, even in many ceremonial roles. The last large military ceremonial display of the Pickelhaube may have been by the Americans, when they displayed over 12,000 in a pyramid at Grand Central, New York. These were captured from warehouses after the war. Pickelhaubes were prized war trophies. That being said, Pickelhaube were still found throughout Germany after World War I. Some fire departments continued to use them as part of ceremonial uniform, and they even made a brief appearance worn at the FIFA World Cup.
Now, we've had some strange occurrences in this camp. Very strange occurrences.
Alright, I'm Johnny. Thanks for watching this video on the Gurkenhelm. I hope it pickled your fancy. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.